Security was called, voices were raised, and Prince Harry was thrown out by his own father, the king. Just days before the grand spectacle of Trooping the Colour 2025, Prince Harry made a bold, unannounced visit to meet King Charles, hoping to be welcomed back into the royal fold. But what happened inside Clarence House left royal aid stunned and the world in disbelief. No handshake, no forgiveness, just a royal command that left Harry humiliated and furious. Why did King Charles refuse his son? What led to this dramatic fallout? And could this be the final chapter in the Windsor War? Stay with us as we uncover the exclusive details, palace leaks, and the emotional toll of a father-son confrontation that shocked the monarchy. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Under the golden skies of a typically grand British summer, one of the most iconic traditions of the United Kingdom, the Trooping the Colour, was poised to unfold in full royal splendor. The event, held annually to celebrate the sovereign's official birthday, carries centuries of ceremonial weight, pageantry, and national pride. But this year, behind the smiles, uniforms, and perfectly rehearsed formations, an unseen storm brewed just hours before the military fanfare commenced. It was not a storm of weather, but of bloodlines and broken trust. It started with what some palace insiders described as an unannounced visit. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, once the beloved soldier prince of a generation, reportedly arrived at Clarence House just days before the official ceremony. No official escort, no formal arrangement, no invitation. Just Harry, stepping back into royal territory uninvited, with a singular, defiant goal, to meet face-to-face with his father, King Charles III, and request to be part of the Trooping the Colour celebrations. The decision to approach his father personally was, according to one royal aide, the last resort of a man who has tried everything else. He was not flanked by Meghan. There were no publicists, no Netflix cameras trailing behind him. Just him. And maybe, just maybe, a final hope that there was still a sliver of open door left in the vast palace halls from which he once roamed freely. But instead of reunion, Harry met rejection. And not just any rejection, but one that involved royal security. If whispers from the inside are to be believed, King Charles did not grant Harry's request with patience or nuance. The king, a monarch under increasing public pressure, a father hardened by repeated perceived betrayals, reportedly called for security to remove his son from the premises. It was swift, it was stern, and it was final, one witness close to the matter said. The story, naturally, didn't stay behind palace gates. Within hours, it had leaked. Not officially, of course, but through the familiar web of palace insiders, seasoned royal journalists, and carefully worded, anonymous sources. The headlines that followed struck like lightning. Prince Harry thrown out by his father, royal security escorted Duke out of Clarence House, Harry pleads for family reinstatement, King Charles says no. To the public, this was a fresh wound torn open in a royal saga already strained by scandal, memoirs, explosive interviews, and court battles. For supporters of Harry, it was heartbreaking. For loyalists of King Charles and the monarchy, it was just another consequence in a line of consequences triggered by Harry and Meghan's departure from royal duties and their subsequent public grievances. But this wasn't just about optics or public relations. This was about blood. This was about a son seeking a way back in, and a father who, in that moment, seemed to slam the door shut, possibly forever. To understand how things reached this boiling point, we have to look at the years leading up to this confrontation. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex's decision to step down as senior royals in 2020 sent shockwaves through the Commonwealth. The reasons they cited were clear: intense media scrutiny, lack of support from the institution, and a deep sense of alienation within the royal family. But in the years that followed, rather than cooling off, the tension escalated. From the Oprah interview where explosive allegations about race and mental health were made, to the release of Prince Harry's memoir, Spare, which painted vivid and often unflattering portraits of his father and brother. Each move seemed to further fracture the already fragile familial ties. Yet, for many, including perhaps Harry himself, there was still hope that one day things could mend. Sources have long hinted that Harry has always yearned for a sense of belonging. To be accepted again, to be part of the family unit that once stood together on the Buckingham Palace balcony. Trooping the Colour was symbolic of that longing. It wasn't just a military parade. It was tradition. It was unity. It was family. So when Harry allegedly appeared at Clarence House requesting to attend, Many observers believe it was a calculated yet emotional appeal, not to the institution of monarchy, but to his father, the man who once held his hand during Princess Diana's funeral, who now wears the crown once meant to shield and shelter. The tension in the room, as described by unnamed palace staffers, could have sliced through marble. Harry's appeal was reportedly direct and without theatrics. "I want to be there. I want to stand with the family again," he may have said. But Charles, whose every public gesture is now scrutinized not just as a father but as a king, was said to be unmoved. Hardened by what he sees as betrayal and public shaming from his youngest son, the monarch did not offer negotiation. And when Harry refused to leave after the initial rejection, the unimaginable happened. Security was summoned, not by palace assistants or royal footmen, but allegedly by the king himself. The image of a father calling guards on his own son might seem Shakespearean, even tragic. But in the high-stakes world of royalty, where symbolism and protocol matter more than sentiment, the move was perhaps intended to send a final, firm message: enough. Palace insiders claim that the order wasn't shouted, but issued in the king's usual restrained tone. Still, the consequences were undeniable. Harry was escorted out, not physically dragged, but clearly removed in a way that left no room for ambiguity. It wasn't just a dismissal from a private conversation. It was a rejection from the very heart of royal tradition. And it was all done just days before the grand public ceremony that Harry had hoped to reclaim a place in. The immediate aftermath saw a barrage of speculation. Was Meghan involved in the decision for Harry to appear unannounced? Was this part of a strategic move to generate sympathy or revive public attention? Or was it truly an emotional, last-minute appeal born from isolation and regret? Whatever the motivation, the result was clear. Harry had been rejected not just by a man, but by the crown. In the days that followed, while Trooping the Colour played out in splendid display, with the royal family waving from the Buckingham Palace balcony and Kate Middleton making a radiant return to public life, the absence of Harry and Meghan was once again both glaring and deliberate. There was no olive branch extended, no last-minute invitation sent, no public mention of the drama that had unfolded behind palace gates. But for royal watchers and the public at large, the damage had been done. The story wasn't about pageantry or pomp. It was about a family that, despite their crowns and castles, appeared more fractured than ever. And perhaps most tragically, it left the public with a single haunting image: a prince standing outside the gates of a house he once called home, denied entry by the very institution and family that raised him. As the early morning sun stretched across the London skyline, casting golden hues over St. James's Park and the Mall, a palpable buzz coursed through the heart of the city. Horses were being brushed to a gleam, regiments stood to attention in pristine formation, and Union Jacks lined every street. This was the day thousands waited for all year, Trooping the Colour. But 2025's edition was anything but ordinary. Though the public only saw the dazzling surface, beneath the grandeur of military fanfare, there simmered a royal crisis, the aftermath of a confrontation that would go on to define the rift within the monarchy for years to come. Trooping the Colour, as tradition holds, is the official celebration of the monarch's birthday, a ceremony rooted in British military history. For over 260 years, it has not only showcased the unity and strength of the British Armed Forces but served as a display of national identity, continuity, and royal heritage. The event is more than just pomp and circumstance. It is a reaffirmation of the monarchy's place in British society. But in 2025, the occasion took on an especially weighty tone. King Charles III, aging and reportedly facing health challenges, stood front and center, rallying the nation's gaze amid quiet speculation about the future of the monarchy. Every element of the parade seemed carefully choreographed, not just for aesthetics but symbolism. The King's Guard, with their towering bearskin hats and immaculate red tunics, moved with mechanical precision. The Irish Guards, Welsh Guards, and the Household Cavalry each took their place in the formation with reverence. Royal Air Squadrons were on standby for the iconic flight past. It was all set to be a triumphant moment of unity for the British people. But there was one key piece missing, and everyone knew it: Prince Harry. His absence, glaring and deliberate, was more than just a scheduling omission. It was a conscious and public confirmation that the once unbreakable bond of royal brotherhood and bloodline had dissolved into formality tension, and silence. While the public might see only the finished product, a perfect display of unity and ceremony, those within the palace walls were acutely aware that this year's celebration masked deep personal fractures. Just days earlier, unconfirmed reports had begun trickling in that Prince Harry was in London, not for a public event, not for a charity or a speech, but privately, quietly, on his own terms. Sources hinted that he had made contact with Clarence House, hoping for a meeting with the king. Some claimed he had simply arrived at the gates unannounced. Others alleged he had submitted a written request for inclusion in Trooping the Color, an olive branch. But all sources agreed on one thing. Harry was not on the guest list, and that fact had not changed. For the public, the optics were powerful. The king, poised to stand before his people in celebration, had declined even the symbolic inclusion of his second son. No balcony appearance, no horseback procession, not even a discreet spot among the extended family in the seated viewing area. The message was unmistakable. The royal family was moving forward without him. What made this year's trooping even more emotionally loaded was the return of Catherine, Princess of Wales, to public life following a prolonged medical absence. Her appearance marked the first time the world saw her since undergoing major health treatment, and the sight of her, poised, smiling, and surrounded by her children, elicited widespread emotional response. For many Britons, she symbolized grace under fire, resilience, and quiet strength. For Harry, observers speculated, seeing her so publicly embraced may have been bittersweet, or even painful. His own wife, Meghan Markle, remained in the United States during the drama. Though there was never any official statement about her absence, it was understood that she would not be attending the event, nor had she been invited. For royal insiders, it was yet another indication that the family had drawn a boundary between working royals and those perceived to have left the institution for personal gain. In a way, the entire setup of Trooping the Color this year became a performance not only for the nation but for the world, a carefully framed tableau of loyalty, structure, and curated family image. Missing from that picture was not only Prince Harry and Meghan, but also any visible acknowledgement of the ongoing tensions. The monarchy has always relied on silence as strategy. They don't rebut every rumor. They don't explain personal decisions. And they never, ever discuss family disputes in public. But the omission spoke volumes. The streets, however, were crowded with faces that reflected every shade of opinion. Some fans held up signs that read, "Welcome back, Kate," while others subtly murmured about Harry's continued absence. Social media buzzed with questions. Would he surprise everyone with a last-minute appearance? Could reconciliation be closer than expected? Or had the rift finally become permanent? It's important to understand the emotional weight behind Harry's longing for trooping. This was an event he had taken part in since childhood. Some of the most iconic photographs of the young prince capture him on the Buckingham Palace balcony, making faces as a little boy, standing beside his mother Diana, and later beside his brother William. Those moments were not just public events, they were his memories, his upbringing, his royal DNA. To be excluded now, not as punishment for crime or failure, but for betrayal in the eyes of the firm, was to be cut off from his own identity. One palace aide remarked in confidence, Harry didn't just want to be seen. He wanted to belong again. But things have moved on. The king sees the institution as bigger than emotion. As the carriages began rolling out and the horses thundered down the mall, the event unfolded with all the pageantry expected of the British monarchy. The king waved, Camilla smiled, Kate beamed with her children at her side, and William stood tall beside his father, the image of continuity. But the one face that had once stood so proudly among them was nowhere to be seen. And to some, that silence was deafening. In hindsight, those who were watching closely knew that something had happened behind the scenes, something unexpected, disruptive, and deeply emotional. Trooping the Color 2025 was not just a royal tradition this year. It was a turning point. It was the moment the monarchy solidified its inner circle and left Harry out of it. The grand gates of Clarence House had witnessed the comings and goings of diplomats, royals, and statesmen for generations. But on this particular morning, those gates opened not for an ambassador or dignitary, but for a prince, one who, in recent years, had become both familiar and estranged. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, made his way toward the royal residence with the quiet force of a man determined to be heard, no matter the cost. There had been no official notice, no appointment on the palace calendar. According to multiple sources close to the inner workings of the royal household, Harry's arrival caught many off guard. The Duke did not come with a security detail recognized by palace staff, nor did he inform King Charles's private office of his intentions ahead of time. It was, by all accounts, an unannounced visit, and one that would immediately send shockwaves throughout the royal corridors. At first, staff were confused. One footman reported later that the Duke appeared tense but focused, stepping from a black vehicle with no press presence, no entourage, no flashy attire. He wore what some described as a navy suit, unremarkable but elegant, blending seriousness with intention. He was clearly not there for ceremony. He came for something more personal. What unfolded next can only be pieced together from leaks and whispers, none of which have been formally acknowledged by Clarence House or Buckingham Palace. But the consistency of the narrative suggests a moment that, while hidden from cameras, was no less seismic in impact. Harry, according to palace sources, asked to speak with his father directly. Not through a secretary, not via an intercom, but in person. "Tell him I'm here. I just need 5 minutes," one aide claimed Harry said to a security official. At first, the request was met with uncertainty. The guards on duty, unprepared for such a visit, communicated the message up the chain. Within minutes, whispers of Harry's presence reached King Charles's private quarters. There was hesitation. Sources familiar with the timeline say the king did not immediately agree to the meeting. In fact, some insiders believe that the initial response was a refusal. But Harry, reportedly, did not leave. He remained at the entry hall of Clarence House, waiting, insisting. After some delay, he was eventually led into a side room, not the formal reception suite, but a smaller, more private parlor used occasionally for discreet meetings. The choice of room itself may have been symbolic, quiet, off-record, out of the public eye. When King Charles entered, he did so not as a father eager for reconciliation, but as a monarch already weary of drama. Multiple palace insiders have since suggested that Charles approached the meeting with suspicion, possibly even frustration. The father-son reunion was not warm, nor did it appear to begin with pleasantries. Instead, both men entered what one witness described as a controlled collision. Harry reportedly began by expressing a desire to attend the upcoming Trooping the Color. "It's my family. It's my heritage. I have the right to stand with them," he allegedly said. His tone was respectful but direct. To him, this was not a publicity stunt. It was an effort to reclaim what he felt had been stripped from him: dignity, recognition, a seat at the royal table. But King Charles, now more monarch than father in these settings, remained unmoved. Reports indicate that he replied curtly, suggesting that the family had made their position clear months prior. "You chose a different path. We cannot continue living in contradiction," he is said to have remarked. For Charles, the line had long been drawn: public attacks, tell-all interviews, the memoir, and constant media commentary had not just burned bridges. They had built walls. Harry, undeterred, pushed further. He referenced his upbringing, his role in past ceremonies, and the symbolic power of unity. The public needs to see healing, he may have argued. But according to a senior aide, Charles didn't flinch. His voice remained firm, emotionless. "Healing begins with responsibility," the king reportedly replied. Tension escalated quickly. At one point, staff outside the room noted raised voices, though none could confirm exactly what was said. But what is clear is that the conversation took a turn. When Harry made it clear that he would not accept "no" as a final answer, and that he would not leave without clarity, Charles reportedly issued the directive that would define the encounter: "Escort him out." Those 3 words, however calmly delivered, triggered a reaction that no one within Clarence House could have anticipated. Palace security, already on alert due to the unannounced nature of Harry's visit, stepped in. The scene was not dramatic in a physical sense. There were no scuffles, no shouting matches. But emotionally, the impact was catastrophic. A son had just been removed from his father's residence, not as a royal guest, but as an uninvited intruder. The symbolic weight of the action cannot be overstated. For a monarch to call for security to remove his own child is rare. For it to happen within days of one of the most public royal events of the year added another layer of public intrigue. And for it to involve Prince Harry, the same man who once walked behind Diana's coffin as a symbol of royal solidarity, was, to many, an unthinkable tragedy. Eyewitnesses say Harry did not argue with the security personnel. He reportedly straightened his jacket, gave one final glance toward the hallway leading to his father's office, and walked toward the exit with an air of reluctant dignity. He looked defeated, one palace staffer said, but also determined. Like this wasn't over. As Harry exited Clarence's house and stepped into the waiting vehicle, no royal plate, no insignia, the moment was marked not with press flashes but silence. Those who watched knew something monumental had occurred, but none could speak on it. Not officially. Not then. Back in Montecito, it said Meghan was informed shortly after. One source claimed she was furious, not just at the rejection, but at the treatment, like he was a stranger, not a son. Others believe she had cautioned Harry against going in the first place, knowing how the palace might react. But Harry, according to friends, had to try. He didn't go there for cameras or headlines. One confidant said. He went there because he still believed, somewhere deep down, that there was something left to save. Within hours, media speculation went into overdrive. How had Harry arrived unnoticed? Why wasn't it arranged officially? What happened during the meeting? Was this the final break between father and son? The royal household issued no comment, as expected. Their silence only fueled the speculation. For Prince Harry, the visit was meant to be a turning point, a chance, however slim, to reassert his place in a family that had all but cast him adrift. Instead, it served as confirmation of what many already suspected. The door to reconciliation, at least for now, was not only closed, it was locked. Within the soft-lit walls of Clarence's house, where history echoes through antique furnishings and state portraits, a confrontation unfolded that would mark one of the most personal and profound breaks in royal memory. There were no press, no cameras, no advisors taking notes. Just two men, a father who had become a king and a son who had become a stranger. The atmosphere was reportedly tense from the moment King Charles entered the side chamber where his youngest son waited. The physical distance between them was small, but the emotional chasm was enormous. King Charles did not enter with open arms. His expression, according to palace aides who later spoke on condition of anonymity, was one of guarded weariness. He had known this day might come, but the timing, so close to a major national event, and without any prior notice, was, in his view, yet another indication of Prince Harry's unpredictable approach. This was not a scheduled audience. It was a forced encounter, and that made it all the more volatile. Harry stood to greet his father. There was no bow, no handshake, only a nod, a subtle gesture that could mean anything from acknowledgement to silent protest. He had traveled far for this meeting, but what he received was distance, formal and cold. The king did not sit, at least not at first. He remained standing near the door, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the room but not immediately meeting his son's. The conversation began not with affection, but protocol. Charles, ever the man of control, reportedly asked bluntly, "Why are you here, Harry?" It was not a question of logistics, but of purpose. Harry's response, as recalled by one source, was immediate and heartfelt. "I want to be part of the family again. I want to be at trooping. I want to stand with you." His voice reportedly cracked on that last sentence, a sign that beneath the headlines, the lawsuits and interviews, there remained a deep well of longing. But Charles was unmoved. His face, described as drawn and tired, did not change. "We have been over this," he allegedly said. "You chose to leave. You chose a different life." What followed was not shouting, but a deeply personal exchange full of tension. Harry spoke of duty, of his love for the traditions he was raised in, of the pain of being cast out publicly. He insisted that his presence at trooping would send a message, not just of unity, but of healing. Yet Charles, perhaps worn thin by years of conflict and scandal, did not interpret it as a step toward healing. To him, Harry's request was a threat to stability. "This is not about you anymore," he is believed to have said. "This is about the crown." That line hit Harry hard. For years, he had lived in the shadow of that phrase. The crown always came first. Before individual needs, before personal pain, before the kind of healing that ordinary families might expect. But Harry was no longer a working royal, and to the institution, he was no longer part of the crown. He was an outsider asking for inclusion on royal terms, not family terms. And that distinction, it seemed, was non-negotiable for the king. Harry pushed back. He reminded Charles of his military service, of the decades he had spent serving the family, the firm, and the public. "Have I not given enough?" he reportedly asked. "Do I have to disappear entirely to earn forgiveness?" But Charles didn't see it as about forgiveness. To him, it was about order and precedent. The royal family, despite its deeply personal core, runs like a constitutional machine. Every action sends a message. Letting Harry appear at Trooping the Color, especially after the lawsuits, the memoir, the Netflix series, and the repeated criticism would, in Charles's mind, be interpreted as a surrender. A concession. A mistake. One source close to the palace said that Charles's response was calm but devastating. "You made your position clear to the world, Harry. Now the world is watching us uphold ours." The emotional climax of the confrontation came when Harry, according to insiders, grew visibly frustrated. "I'm not asking for the balcony. I'm not asking for speeches. I'm asking to be there as your son," he reportedly said. But that argument, one based on emotion and shared history, seemed only to widen the divide. Charles was not speaking as a father anymore. He was speaking as the monarch, the head of the firm, the man who had to make decisions not for personal comfort, but for institutional continuity. And as the monarch, one aide reported him saying, "I have to protect what remains of this family's credibility." There was a long silence after that, one that, according to those who waited just outside the door, lingered for what felt like minutes. Neither man spoke. The weight of history, betrayal, loss, and impossible expectations hung between them. Then came the moment no one expected. Harry, unwilling to take no for an answer, allegedly made one final plea. He said he would attend anyway, from the sidelines if needed. That's when Charles issued the command that has since become infamous within palace circles. "Escort him out." Those 3 words, delivered not in anger but with finality, carried the force of generations. For a royal to be escorted out of Clarence House, especially by order of the king, is unheard of in modern times. It was a line crossed, a wall built. Security entered the room quietly but quickly. Harry, recognizing what had happened, didn't resist. He didn't shout. But those who witnessed him exiting said his face was pale, his jaw tight. This was no longer a negotiation. It was rejection, clear and complete. Palace insiders say that once the room was cleared, King Charles remained still for some time, silent, eyes focused on the empty chair where Harry had just sat. There was no gloating, no visible relief, only exhaustion, only the silence of a father who had just turned away his son again. The confrontation at Clarence House would never be confirmed officially. The palace, as is tradition, would offer no comment on private family matters. But the echoes of that moment would ripple through the royal world in the days and weeks that followed. For Harry, it was a reminder that despite the blood that binds, the institution sees no family, only roles, duties, and consequences. For Charles, it was a line in the sand, a boundary drawn with the full weight of the crown behind it. The words were quiet. They weren't yelled. They weren't even said with rage. But they landed like a thunderclap in the room. "Escort him out." 3 words. 3 words that brought decades of royal drama, tension, and heartache to a head. In that moment, King Charles III was not simply a father confronting a wounded son. He was the sovereign, the protector of the crown, the guardian of tradition, and he had just made a decision that would go down as one of the most personal and shocking moments of his reign. To the outside world, the confrontation remained invisible. The ornate windows of Clarence House showed only reflections of the morning sun and bustling preparations for the upcoming Trooping the Color. But within the house, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Prince Harry, stunned, reportedly stood silently for a beat, unsure whether what he'd heard was real. Not even during the darkest family rows of the past, during the Sussex's exit, the Oprah interview fallout, or the release of Spare, had things descended to this level. But this was different. This was direct. This was final. 2 members of the king's security team entered the room within moments. These were not guards in ceremonial uniform. These were discreet professionals trained not just in defense but in diplomacy. Their mission wasn't to make a scene. It was to act quickly and respectfully. But even the most professional approach couldn't hide the symbolism of what was taking place. The air of a late princess. The man who once stood beside his brother and father during one of the most mourned funerals in modern memory. The soldier who wore his grandmother's medals with pride and saluted his grandfather's casket. Now being asked to leave, not because of protocol, but because of personal fracture. Witnesses from the palace staff who spoke anonymously later described the scene in hushed tones. One said, "You could feel it in the walls, something irreversible had happened." Another commented that you expect history in these rooms, but not like that. Not heartbreak. Prince Harry reportedly remained composed. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. But there was no mistaking the pain in his eyes. He had crossed oceans, both physically and emotionally, for this meeting. And it had ended not just in denial, but dismissal. "This isn't how it should be," one insider quoted him saying softly before stepping toward the door. It was unclear whether that comment was directed to the king, the guards, or just the centuries of tradition that now seemed to push him out. As he exited the room, the halls of Clarence House were silent. Staff turned away respectfully. No one made eye contact. It was as though the very walls were holding their breath, trying to absorb the shame and sorrow without revealing it. The king remained behind. He didn't follow. He didn't call him back. According to those familiar with the moment, Charles sat down slowly in the chair nearest the fireplace and stared ahead for a long time. Whether he was reflecting on his decision, on the long journey that had led to it, or simply retreating inward to shield himself from what had just occurred, no one knows. But what is clear is that he didn't change his mind. Outside Clarence House, Harry's car remained parked along the private driveway, engine running. No royal markings. No aides. No press. Just a black vehicle waiting to carry away a man who was once at the center of the royal family and now seemed to orbit further and further from its gravitational pull. The moment he stepped into the vehicle, it was done. He didn't slam the door. He didn't speak to any reporters. There were none. He didn't gesture. But the weight in his posture as the car pulled away spoke louder than any headline. Back inside the palace, aides scrambled to recover. There was no official protocol for what had just happened. The king had ejected his own son from the residence. While technically within his rights, Clarence House is a royal residence and the monarch's authority within it is absolute, it was still unprecedented. Never in recent history had a royal been asked to leave in such a deliberate manner, especially not one who was, by title, still a duke and the son of the sitting monarch. The question for the staff became, how would the public find out? Within hours, murmurs had begun to circulate in media circles. Royal correspondents started hearing whispers. Harry showed up uninvited. He was asked to leave. Security escorted him out. These weren't rumors, they were informed leaks, intentional or not, designed to prepare the media for the storm to come. And come it did. As the first reports emerged, online reactions were immediate. Some social media users expressed shock. Others expressed support, for either Harry or Charles. There was debate. There was outrage. There was sympathy. But above all, there was disbelief. Even those who had followed the royal drama for years weren't prepared for this level of cold formality. Public opinion divided quickly. Supporters of Harry saw the moment as the ultimate betrayal, proof that the monarchy was incapable of compassion or flexibility. He went back to reconcile and was treated like an outsider, read one viral post. Others argued that the king had made the right decision. You don't get to attack your family on global platforms and then ask to rejoin the celebration, read another. Commentators appeared across networks, speculating about the implications. What did this mean for future royal events? For reconciliation? For Charles's legacy? For William's eventual kingship? Had the line between personal and institutional been shattered beyond repair? Meanwhile, the palace remained silent. As always, they offered no comment on private family matters. But the absence of a denial was telling. And the refusal to clarify left the door wide open for continued speculation. The emotional gravity of that single moment, when the king called for security to remove his son, was felt not just by those involved, but by the entire world watching. It wasn't just a family spat. It was history unfolding. A deeply personal story written in the ink of protocol and pain. Later that evening, as the royal family rehearsed for the Trooping the Colour event, the halls of Buckingham Palace remained quiet about the morning's drama. But behind closed doors, the implications were understood. For Charles, it was a decision made for the institution. A statement of control, unity, and boundary. For Harry, it was a message received loud and clear. Whatever bridge might have remained between him and the monarchy had now been set aflame. As the gates of Clarence House swung open to allow the black vehicle to exit, a solitary figure sat inside. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, visibly shadowed by what had just transpired behind palace walls. The emotional weight of the meeting had settled over him like a second skin. In mere minutes, he had been reminded of how far he had drifted from the royal fold. But being physically removed by security on the command of his own father, King Charles III, was a consequence that few, if any, believed would ever happen. The vehicle rolled slowly through the royal driveway, past flower beds and fountains, under the heavy iron arches of the gate, and out onto the streets of London. For the general public walking past Clarence House that morning, nothing seemed amiss. The city bustled with the usual activity in anticipation of the grand parade that would soon mark the king's official birthday. But inside that car, one of the most personal royal ruptures of the modern era had just occurred. Harry's face, seen briefly through the tinted window by one bystander who later spoke to the press, was pale and tense. There was no dramatic gesture, no slamming of doors or screaming into phones. But those who know him best would have seen the signs: clenched jaw, downward gaze, and a silence that was far heavier than any words he could have spoken. According to a source close to Harry's private staff, the vehicle didn't immediately head to the airport or a hotel. It reportedly took a detour through central London, allowing Harry time to gather himself. At one point, the car stopped near Kensington Gardens. He didn't get out, but he did sit there for some time, staring out at the city that had once been his home. It was a symbolic pause. London was not just a place, it was the cradle of his royal identity. And now, it felt like enemy territory. The driver eventually continued the journey toward an undisclosed location, believed to be a private residence where Harry had been staying discreetly. No palace accommodations had been arranged. No royal courtiers were involved. The distance between Harry and the institution was both physical and emotional. He was in London, but not truly welcome. Not anymore. Back inside Clarence House, the king reportedly returned to his duties with a stoic face, but aides later shared that he appeared visibly shaken. There was no gloating, no pride, just the silent burden of a father who had made a decision that, while necessary in his eyes, came with a heavy emotional toll. He knew what it meant, one royal advisor said, and he knew it would follow both of them for the rest of their lives. As word of the incident began to seep into media channels, reporters were cautious. The palace had said nothing officially, so there was no confirmation. But the speed and consistency with which royal correspondents received the details made it clear something had definitely happened, and it wasn't just a heated family exchange. This was unprecedented. This was a break with centuries of royal etiquette. Initial headlines were speculative. Did Prince Harry try to force his way back into trooping the color? One online outlet questioned. Another took a more direct angle. Harry escorted from Clarence House following unplanned visit. By evening, the headlines had shifted to something bolder. King Charles orders Prince Harry out ahead of royal ceremony. Social media erupted. Hashtags began trending across Twitter and TikTok. Hashtag Harry thrown out, hashtag royal fallout, hashtag Charles versus Harry. Some fans decried the palace's apparent coldness. How can you call yourself a family and do this to your own blood? Wrote one user. Others defended the king's decision, pointing out the years of public criticism and personal attacks leveled by Harry and Meghan. You don't burn the house down and expect to be invited to the dinner party, one tweet read. Harry's critics highlighted the irony of his actions. After leaving the royal family to escape the toxicity, as he once phrased it, he had returned without notice and demanded inclusion. His supporters, however, saw it differently. He's trying to make peace, and they threw him out like a criminal. In the U.S., late-night talk shows and pundits quickly picked up on the story. Some made jokes, others took a more serious tone. American audiences, generally more sympathetic to the Sussexes, framed the incident as yet another proof of a stiff and unyielding monarchy that had driven out its most human face. British media, meanwhile, were more divided. Some commentators called Harry reckless and accused him of using emotional manipulation. Others argued the palace had missed a crucial opportunity for reconciliation. Back in Montecito, the mood was said to be tense. Meghan, though not present at Clarence House, was informed immediately of the outcome. According to a source familiar with her reaction, she was incensed not just at the king, but at what she reportedly saw as a humiliating setup. Some speculated that she had warned Harry this would happen, and that he had gone against her advice. Others claimed she had encouraged the visit, believing it would demonstrate maturity and openness. Whatever the truth, the fallout from the decision was global and instantaneous. Within royal circles, however, the event served a different purpose. It became the new watermark for where the lines were drawn. One palace aide described it as the end of the ambiguity. For months, if not years, the public had questioned whether Harry and Meghan might eventually return in some limited capacity, whether the family would find common ground, whether trooping the color could be a moment of quiet unity. That illusion, it seemed, had now been shattered. Even royal insiders who had once sympathized with Harry's frustrations admitted the situation had changed. "There's only so many times you can walk away and expect the door to remain open," said one longtime household member. Eventually, even a father has to protect what's left. Yet the human cost of that protection was undeniable. Harry, for all his flaws and missteps, was still a son. Still the boy who had walked behind Diana's casket. Still the young man who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, launched the Invictus Games, and brought a modern touch to royal engagements. That man had now been shown the door, not metaphorically, but literally. The symbolism of being escorted out by security rather than accompanied by family was not lost on anyone. It spoke to a finality that words could never fully capture. In royal protocol, public actions speak louder than private reconciliations. And this action screamed. Trooping the color came and went days later with all the usual grandeur. The king appeared poised, Kate stood with her children and waved to cheering crowds, and William projected strength and unity as the future of the monarchy. The cameras captured a moment of public order. But behind the scenes, the family was more fractured than ever. Harry did not issue any official comment. Neither did Meghan. But one source close to the Sussexes suggested that this moment would change everything. "There's no going back now," the source said. "Not after this." For royal historians, this incident may well be remembered as a defining moment in the Second Elizabethan era's aftermath, a moment not of crowns or ceremonies, but of real, raw family division. A moment where tradition triumphed over emotion, and where a son was made to understand, once and for all, that while titles may be inherited, acceptance must be earned, and can also be revoked. To the untrained eye, royal events appear as glamorous spectacles. Processions, trumpets, tiaras, and well-rehearsed balcony appearances. But beneath that polished veneer lies a deeply entrenched system of rules, traditions, and expectations. Nothing in the royal family is accidental. Every appearance, absence, seat arrangement, and guest list is intentional and layered with symbolic meaning. That's why Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's exclusion from Trooping the Colour 2025 was not a mere oversight. It was a meticulously calculated decision that reflected years of tension, public embarrassment, and private disillusionment between the Sussexes and the institution they left behind. Many casual observers may wonder, why weren't Harry and Meghan invited? After all, Harry is the king's son. Regardless of titles and working roles, the bloodline is indisputable. But in the world of royal protocol, blood alone is not enough to grant inclusion. The monarchy thrives on continuity, stability, and public trust. Any figure perceived to disrupt that delicate balance, no matter how beloved they once were, is sidelined for the good of the institution. The seeds of exclusion were sown in early 2020, when Harry and Meghan stunned the world with their announcement that they would step back from royal duties. The term "step back" quickly became a subject of debate. Was it temporary? Was it partial? Or was it, as many feared, a full departure disguised as a sabbatical? The Queen's subsequent response clarified things. The couple would no longer represent the crown in any capacity. They would not receive public funds, nor would they be allowed to use their HRH titles in an official context. From that moment on, Harry and Meghan were outside the formal structure of the monarchy. And while family bonds still technically remained, their public roles did not. The decision set off a chain reaction. Every major royal event following their departure was viewed through the lens of inclusion or exclusion. Would they be invited? Would they appear? If so, where would they stand? With each event, it became clearer that the divide was growing wider. The turning point came with their now infamous interview with Oprah Winfrey in March 2021. For the monarchy, a family known for stoic silence and stiff upper lips, the interview was nothing short of a nuclear bomb. Meghan's allegations of racism within the royal household, combined with her claims of emotional distress and institutional neglect, painted a damning picture of life inside the palace. Harry's contribution, that his father had stopped taking his calls, that his brother was trapped, and that he felt abandoned, only deepened the chasm. What followed was not a series of reconciliations, but further ruptures. Meghan gave subsequent interviews, speaking on everything from her mental health to media harassment. Harry appeared on podcasts and documentaries, where he openly criticized royal parenting, media complicity, and even his own upbringing. And then came the memoir Spare. Published in early 2023, Spare was perhaps the most detailed and personal account of royal life ever written by a senior royal. In it, Harry shared everything from physical fights with Prince William to deeply personal conversations with Charles, and painful moments involving the late Princess Diana. While the book sold millions of copies and resonated with a global audience, it infuriated the palace. The monarchy has always operated under the rule of never complain, never explain. To see one of its own airing private grievances, even under the guise of healing, was viewed as betrayal. By the time 2025 rolled around, the cumulative effect of these actions had hardened opinions within the royal household. King Charles, a man once known for his idealism and introspection, had become a more pragmatic ruler. As monarch, his first duty was to the institution, not the individual. And from the institution's perspective, Harry and Meghan's actions had caused measurable damage. Palace advisors reportedly urged the king to draw a firm line ahead of the Trooping the Color ceremony. Inviting Harry and Meghan would, in their eyes, undermine the message of unity and stability that the monarchy was trying to project. The fear was that their presence, especially if it resulted in tense body language, viral balcony photos, or tabloid speculation, would dominate headlines and distract from the central purpose of the event, honoring the monarch and the nation. Some insiders also raised concerns about the Sussexes' past use of royal appearances for media leverage. Whether fair or not, the perception within the palace was that Harry and Meghan had, at times, used proximity to the crown to boost their personal brand. Netflix contracts, Spotify deals, and lucrative speaking engagements all seemed to orbit around their former royal identity. Allowing them back into the spotlight, even briefly, would provide a fresh set of images and talking points for future projects. There were also logistical concerns. Where would they stand? Who would they ride with? Would they appear on the balcony? Would the children, Archie and Lilibet, attend? Would Meghan appear beside Kate, the Princess of Wales, after years of reports about tension and fallout? Each of these questions presented risk. Each carried the potential to derail the carefully curated message of unity that the king hoped to send. And so, the decision was made quietly but definitively. There would be no invitation extended to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex for Trooping the Color 2025. The palace did not make a public announcement. They didn't need to. The silence was the message. Interestingly, not all members of the royal family were completely aligned on the decision. Some senior royals reportedly expressed concern that the exclusion might be seen as heartless, especially given the king's well-documented emphasis on a slimmed-down monarchy. Others, however, argued that continued leniency would embolden Harry and Meghan to push boundaries even further. Behind the scenes, there were also discussions about public perception. Would the British people support the decision? Would they view the king as firm or unforgiving? Polling conducted by a private firm reportedly showed that the majority of Britons supported the exclusion. The royal brand, while still immensely popular, had suffered under the cloud of scandal. The king, by taking a harder stance, appeared to be reclaiming control of the narrative. As for Harry and Meghan, they were reportedly informed of the decision weeks in advance through intermediaries. No official correspondence was released, and the couple made no formal complaint. However, sources close to the Sussexes indicated that they were disappointed, not just by the exclusion, but by the message it sent about their future. They still hoped, even quietly, that there was a path back, said one insider. This made it clear that the bridge may already be gone. Despite being excluded, the couple remained a topic of conversation throughout the lead-up to trooping. Media outlets speculated endlessly about whether Harry would attend in private, whether Meghan would post something cryptic on social media, and whether the absence would be addressed at all. When Harry ultimately did attempt to appear, uninvited, just days before the event, the palace's firm response only reinforced how tightly guarded royal traditions had become. The exclusion also raised larger questions about the future of royal protocol in the modern age. Can a family so deeply rooted in history adapt to the realities of global media, fractured families, and competing narratives? Or is the only way to maintain order through rigid enforcement of tradition? For now, the monarchy has chosen the latter. Trooping the Color went forward without the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and the message was received loud and clear. Inclusion in royal events is not based on birthright alone. It requires loyalty, discretion, and alignment with the values of the institution. Harry and Meghan, in choosing a different path, also chose to forfeit those privileges, at least in the eyes of the crown. And while the doors of Buckingham Palace may never be locked entirely, they are now guarded more fiercely than ever, not just by security, but by precedent, perception, and power. while Prince Harry faced the humiliating aftermath of being escorted out of Clarence's house, more than 5,000 miles away in Montecito, California. Meghan Markle was processing the event from behind the scenes in her usual environment. Once surrounded by curated calm, security, and a tightly controlled public image. But inside the high walls of their estate, far removed from the formalities of British tradition and palace protocol, Meghan's response to the events in London was reportedly anything but calm. According to sources close to the Sussex household, Meghan's first reaction was one of disbelief, followed almost immediately by anger. Reports suggest she was not just shocked at what had happened, but deeply outraged by how her husband was treated, not only as a family member, but as a former royal. To her, it wasn't simply about being denied an invitation to a ceremony. It was about dignity, a sense of betrayal, a confirmation of everything she had warned about from the very beginning. She felt vindicated, said one insider familiar with Meghan's inner circle. She always believed that the royal institution would never fully accept her or Harry again. But to see Harry being physically removed from his father's residence by palace guards, it was like every fear she ever had about the monarchy came true in that single moment. The couple's dynamic has always been carefully scrutinized, and moments like this reignite the question of who influences whom. In this case, some suggest Meghan had discouraged Harry from attempting a last-minute visit in the first place. She had reportedly advised that it would be unwise, possibly even humiliating. But Harry, driven by a personal need to reconnect with his roots, to show he was still willing to be part of the family, made the decision to go regardless. If Meghan had her doubts about the trip, they were reportedly confirmed the moment the phone call came in. The message that Harry had been turned away, that security had been involved, and that his request had been rejected outright. According to insiders, Meghan's anger wasn't just directed at the king. It extended to the entire royal system, which she has often described privately as cold, hierarchical, and lacking emotional intelligence. She felt they used Harry's vulnerability against him, said one source. He came alone, in good faith, with no press, no cameras, just a hope of being heard, and they threw him out like a trespasser. Within hours of the incident becoming public, Meghan went into what her team often refers to as strategic response mode. This is not an unusual routine in the Sussex household. Every event, every public story, is analyzed, dissected, and evaluated for potential impact. This time, however, there was no plan to speak publicly. Not yet. Meghan reportedly decided that silence would speak louder than a statement. But internally, she began reevaluating everything from their current public narrative to future opportunities and how this particular episode might shift global opinion back in their favor. According to another source within their PR circle, Meghan saw the event as a turning point. She knows people are tired of the back and forth. But this wasn't petty family drama. This was a father telling the world that his son is no longer welcome. That's something people can emotionally connect with. She believes it will help reset the narrative. Still, behind the public relations strategies and controlled responses was the personal reaction. Meghan, for all her efforts to distance herself from the toxic environment she described the palace to be, was still human. She reportedly cried, not out of fear or self-pity, but out of helplessness. Harry had walked into a room to speak to his father, to attempt something healing, and he had come back metaphorically bruised. The timing couldn't have been worse. Meghan had spent months trying to rebrand their image, away from grievance and toward empowerment. New projects were in development, including philanthropic efforts, media ventures, and possible upcoming appearances on influential platforms. She had hoped that the months following the king's coronation would provide space for quiet rebuilding. But the Clarence House incident had brought them crashing back into the headlines, and not for reasons she would have chosen. Her team reportedly debated releasing a carefully worded statement, perhaps something diplomatic, expressing disappointment but reaffirming the couple's commitment to healing and unity. But Meghan reportedly vetoed the idea. She didn't want to appear weak, nor did she want to give the palace the satisfaction of controlling the narrative. Let them explain themselves, she allegedly said. One of the more surprising aspects of Meghan's reaction, according to those close to her, was that it wasn't only emotional, it was strategic. She reportedly began questioning whether continued efforts at reconciliation were even worth the toll it was taking on Harry's mental and emotional health. Her concern wasn't just with public perception. It was with the private man behind the media frenzy, her husband, whom she feared was still holding on to hope where there was none. She told Harry that she supported him, but that they needed to move on. one insider said. She said, "They've made it clear, time and again, what your place is. You're not a prince to them anymore. You're a problem." That statement, while reportedly said in private, encapsulated a larger truth. Meghan has come to believe that the institution of monarchy cannot change, and that inclusion only comes at the price of silence and conformity. Neither she nor Harry were willing to pay that price again. But the incident also stirred something more primal in Meghan, a maternal instinct, a desire to protect her family at all costs. Now more than ever, she reportedly felt the need to shield Archie and Lilibet from the toxic dynamics that had consumed so much of Harry's life. "This is why we left," she reportedly said, echoing a sentiment she has expressed multiple times since 2020. Despite all the emotion and fallout, there were no reports of Meghan reaching out to any members of the royal family directly. The communication freeze remained in place. No calls to Charles. No messages to William. The family rift, already deep, had become an unbridgeable canyon. Whatever thread of diplomacy may have existed between Meghan and any member of the royal institution seemed to have snapped completely. There were some within Meghan's extended circle, former colleagues, friends from her acting days, and even American media personalities who rallied to her side behind the scenes. A few reportedly reached out with offers to help control the narrative, suggest interviews, or arrange support. But Meghan, for now, declined. "She's not looking to do damage control," said one friend. "She's looking to heal." But this showed her that healing isn't going to happen over there. Not with them. Not anymore. And so, in the days following the Clarence House incident, Meghan stayed mostly out of public view. No social media posts. No paparazzi sightings. No surprise appearances at charity events. Just a quiet, intentional retreat. But those close to the Sussexes say that behind closed doors, plans were already shifting. The message was clear. It was time to fully embrace the new life they had built, not as royals, not as exiles, but as independent figures no longer seeking validation from an institution that had repeatedly turned them away. As Prince Harry's departure from Clarence House played out in silence behind palace walls, the outside world was already beginning to churn with speculation. What had started as a quiet, unplanned encounter between father and son quickly escalated into one of the biggest media firestorms the royal family had faced since the infamous Megxit saga. By the time the day was over, what should have been a week dominated by coverage of the Trooping the Color 2025 ceremony had transformed into a global frenzy focused almost entirely on one shocking development: Prince Harry being forcibly removed from a royal residence by the direct order of King Charles III. It started with whispers, a few cryptic tweets from royal correspondents known to have insider access, an Instagram story from a palace photographer hinting at a major incident at Clarence House. Then, by mid-afternoon, the reports began rolling in, carefully worded at first, avoiding outright confirmation, but unmistakable in tone. Prince Harry turned away from royal meeting with King Charles. Sources say heated exchange prompted security involvement. Prince Harry left Clarence House after tense confrontation with the king. The headlines were crafted with caution, but the subtext was loud and clear. This wasn't a diplomatic disagreement. This was a dramatic rejection, and the media couldn't get enough of it. Within hours, international outlets picked up the story. In the United States, it quickly made its way to the top of trending news on major platforms. Harry thrown out by his father, what really happened inside Clarence House, blared across headlines from New York to Sydney. Talk shows debated the implications. Morning anchors replayed clips from past interviews. Pundits and body language experts began dissecting Harry's last public appearance for signs of stress or anticipation. In the United Kingdom, the reaction was even more intense. British tabloids, long obsessed with the Sussexes, ran the story on front pages the following morning. One tabloid published an illustrated timeline of Harry's visit, complete with diagrams of Clarence House, security routes, and speculative quotes from unnamed insiders. "The return and the rejection," one paper called it. "Harry's last attempt to reclaim royal honor ends at the gates," read another. More serious broadsheets offered in-depth commentary on what the event meant for the monarchy. Royal historians were quoted. Constitutional experts weighed in on the symbolic power of Charles's decision. The event wasn't just being discussed as a family crisis, it was being analyzed as a strategic maneuver, a moment of institutional boundary setting in real time. Perhaps the most explosive reactions, however, came from social media. Twitter, X, TikTok, and Instagram became grounds for fierce debate, emotional outpourings, and speculative theories. Hashtags began trending globally. Hashtag Harry thrown out. Hashtag Charles shuts the door. Hashtag royal fallout. Hashtag Windsor War. TikTokers uploaded reaction videos by the hundreds, many of them splicing together footage from Harry's past appearances at Trooping the Color with sad music and captions like, "From Pride of the Palace to Outsider in Exile." Others used the moment as comedic fodder, generating memes that spread like wildfire. One viral meme showed a Monopoly board with Clarence House labeled, "Do not pass, return to Montecito." But underneath the humor, there was also a wave of serious concern. Psychologists and mental health advocates weighed in online, highlighting the emotional toll such a rejection might take on someone already struggling with feelings of isolation and betrayal. "This isn't about titles," wrote one mental health advocate. "It's about a man who lost his mother in the public eye, who walked the tightrope of duty and trauma, being cast out of the only home he's ever known." Major networks convened emergency panels. CNN, BBC, Sky News, and even entertainment-focused networks like E! and Access Hollywood scrambled to schedule segments dissecting what had happened. In the United States, particularly, commentators were far more sympathetic to Harry. American culture, which values emotional openness and confrontation of trauma, responded with a mixture of shock and sadness. "How can a father do that to his son?" asked one American morning show host, voice tinged with disbelief. "This wasn't a